learn to do stained glass. All you need are some supplies, tools, and someone to show you how. That's where I come in. I'm Stella Athena of Athena Stained Glass. I've been doing stained glass for almost 25 years using the Tiffany technique. I have a degree in education and 32 years teaching experience. Let me be your stained glass guru. Come on, I'll show you how. Welcome to Athena Stained Glass Beginners Class 1 Straight Cuts. And today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about doing stained glass so that you can get started on your very own project. You need a very sturdy work surface to work on, and you need material that will hold up under glass, sharp objects, and hot soldering iron. And this serves very well. It won't catch fire, it won't melt. There's several ways to do this project. I'm going to show you the simplest way, and we'll begin with a 2 by 2 inch square. You can use any dimension that you want. The most important tool in your toolbox is a pair of safety glasses. You may also need a pair of gloves to protect your hands when you're handling sharp objects and hot projects.
This project is supported in part by the National Endowment for the Arts and a grant from the Tamarack Foundation for the Arts. If you would like to learn more about how the National Endowment for the Arts impact individuals and communities, visit www.arts.gov.
For my project today, I'll be using this beautiful blue piece of glass and a striking red. I'll need 4 2 by 2 pieces of this, so 2 by 8 or 16 square inches of the red and 20 square inches of the blue. Welcome to Athena's Stained Glass Beginner Class 1, making straight cuts. And this straight cut lends itself well to a project like we're going to make today, a 9-piece quilt square pattern. So in order to make this, we'll need 2 different colors of glass, at least 2 different colors of glass. You can use 9 different colors of glass. If you just had little scrap pieces and that's what you wanted to use, that's fine. So you'll need a 2 by 2 square to begin with. And we like to start with a straight edge if you have it. If you don't, that's fine. But I like to put my pattern up to the edge just to save glass and time cutting, so that really helps if you have a straight edge. This line that I just made has some thickness to it, so it makes a difference which side of the line that you cut on then. So I'm going to move my pattern piece to the inside of that mark. So I'll be cutting on the inside, not the outside of this line, because it does make a difference. Just like if you were making a quilt, that would make a difference. So I'm going to put a dot to remind myself which side of that line I'm going to cut on. Now if you were using just a regular piece of glass, you wouldn't do that. You would just trace around it and cut. But this really helps me to save time and glass. And you always want to try to find ways to conserve glass and time. We just have so much of that. For this project, I'm going to use the red to cut out 5 pieces and the blue to cut out 4 pieces, because this is a 9-piece quilt square pattern. Now, like I said, if you wanted to make yours 9 different colors, that's fine. Or 4 of each color and a color in the middle. You know, just whatever you want. But I'll just show you how I do it using this method. There are other methods of cutting out squares. Before you begin, this is your first time cutting glass, I recommend that you take some time and practice on a scrap piece of glass. Your stained glass cutter has a little wheel that comes in contact with your glass. It comes to a little point and it fits down in this little groove. I use this groove to guide me when I'm cutting on my pattern, but I wanted to point out that you can't start in the middle of your glass and cut if you want to make a straight line or any thing you want to cut. You don't want to start in the middle of the glass or stop in the middle of the glass, because you can see, it doesn't cut, it doesn't break correctly. And when you're cutting, you're not trying to cut through the glass, you're just trying to score the glass. So when you begin cutting, you start off the edge, and I hold my cutter like a pencil and put some pressure on the end, and you want to listen for a scritch. You keep steady pressure, don't lift up on your tool until you're finished, but you're going to start here and go all the way through to the other end. Regardless if your pattern, only if you just needed this much, you still have to cut all the way through your glass. And then it breaks pretty easily. But again, get used to the way that sounds and the pressure that you need just to hear that scritch. I'm not putting much pressure on it, just barely. And when the pieces get too small for you to safely break them with your fingers, that's where these pliers come in. These are grazing pliers, and they have a curved underjaw. And you put that curved underjaw on the opposite side of the glass from where you scored. And you move your grazing pliers right up to that line and then pull. And that's what breaks your glass. So practice until you feel comfortable. Always keep your work surface clean. Every time you make a score and a break, take the time to clean. If you don't, then if you lay your score on the underside of your glass, it's going to cause it to break unpredictably. Sometimes you won't even notice until you get to solder, and then it will break under the heat. So like I said, I have to start off the edge of the glass, put my cutter using the little notch as a guide, and I'm going to cut on the inside of the line. I'm not going to pick up my tool until I'm all the way through. I hold it like a pencil and put pressure on the end. Now I can use my grazing pliers or my line breakers, or I can just hold it with my thumbs on either side of the score and just give it a little nudge, and it'll usually break quite nicely. Clean your surface. Note which side of that line your dot is on. Cut on the inside of that line. Don't lift your tool. And there I have my 5 pieces. So I have already cut my blue, I've got the red ready to go, and now it's time to grind. So the next step in this process is to grind because when we cut freehand, it isn't always perfectly straight. And there's always kind of a movement this way, and it's kind of jagged and very sharp. So we need to grind these so that they will fit together very nicely. Now that I have my pieces, it's time to grind. Never grind without your goggles. It's the most important tool that you have in your kit. Your job is to protect your eyes first and foremost, so always wear your goggles. Always use distilled water in your grinder to keep it from corroding and keep the dust down. Never use your grinder when it's dry. Just like coal miners get black lung, you can get white lung or silicosis from using your grinder dry. And never clean your grinder when it is dry. And I use a little splash guard to protect the rest of the room when I'm grinding. I put a little towel under my grinder to keep the surface from getting wet. So you want to grind away any black marks on your When I first start grinding my glass, I want to make sure I go all the way around so that I don't have any little sharp shards that's going to cut me. And I use a framer's square to make sure my pieces are nice and square. Be careful not to grind away your corners. I just start my grinding wheel turning and then ease my glass up to it. Here you can see that there is quite a bit of grinding to do. Try to zoom in. So you don't want to grind anywhere where there's not a mark, or especially if there's a dip, you don't want to keep grinding. The side with the dot, most of it has been ground or cut away. We just need to grind away enough to get rid of that silver mark. And on this side, we need to get rid of the silver mark, but here we're going to keep the silver mark because we marked it to remind ourselves that that's the side that we keep the mark. This is the side where we get rid of the mark. This is the side that we cut on the inside of the line. So that's one technique, and the most important thing is we need to make sure that it matches the others, that everything's the same size and same shape. So let's put these together. Cutting free-handed makes it difficult. If you have a Morton's cutting board, it makes your life a lot easier. Now that we've got these all ground, we need to make sure they're very dry. Now it's time to wrap our glass with copper foil. This is the Tiffany technique, or the foil method. For this one, need a 7/32 copper foil. I'm going to use a black patina, so I'm going to use a black back copper foil. The reason we would use the appropriate copper is because of the patina that we're going to use. I want to use black with this one. I could use a copper, but if I use a black patina with a copper back, it's going to show through and it's not going to look good. So if I use a black back foil, if it shows through and I use a black patina, it's not going to show. It's not going to really stand out. So, and the way I foil is, this foil has a sticky back to it, and you peel away the paper to reveal that sticky back. But I put it between my fingers like this, and then I put the corner of my glass onto the center of this foil. You want it centered. Then I just kind of sight down it, and then look at the corner and put it right in the center and just turn my glass. I don't try to put the tape on the glass. I put the glass on the tape. So I center, looking at the corner, and then just turn my glass onto my tape. That's the easiest way I've found to do that. And it tears pretty easily. Use your marker as a burnishing tool and rub the sides of that copper really well so that it makes good contact. And then push in. Don't slide up and down, you'll slice your fingers. So push in on the tape around the sides and then burnish it down. And then get those corners down because they're kind of hard to push down with your fingers. Then I like to lay it on a flat surface and give it a good burnishing on both sides. Especially on that textured side, you want to pay attention and get that really well. Now sometimes when you overlap, the solder or the foil kind of sticks out. You want to get rid of that. So you want to carefully remove that tape where it sticks out. Try not to let it happen to begin with, but if it does, that's how you take care of it. So again, you don't try to put the tape on the glass, you put the glass onto the tape and just turn it. If you didn't have any black back foil, which is getting hard to come by these days, I'll tell you a remedy. If you, I tell you to center your glass on your tape. Like this. It's the same on both sides. But if you didn't have, if all you had was copper, but you wanted to use a black patina anyway, what you would do is determine the front and the back, and I always use the smoothest side of my project as the part that's facing me when I hang it. So I would put more of the tape towards the front and less towards the back, so I would just offset it. It wouldn't be placed in the center, it'd be placed so that there'd be more foil on the front of your project, and that would be one remedy for that. That way when you looked at it when it was hanging, you wouldn't notice what color the backing was. So that's one thing that you can do just to, in case you don't have the right color backing to match the patina that you prefer. And we have a black patina and a copper patina. Or you can leave it silver. And if you leave it silver, just know that it will eventually tarnish and get blotchy and gray, and then eventually all turn black after a long period of time. So just know that if you leave it silver and don't put any patina on it, it's going to go through these weird stages. What you can do to offset that is to keep it waxed. You can put like a glass wax on it, but you probably have to apply it again and again. I just prefer to use patina and get it over with. It kind of turns it all at once so you don't have to go through all those stages. You want a well-ventilated area to work in when you're soldering, which is the next thing we're going to do. And you'll need to have this firm surface that's going to be appropriate for your height. You don't want to be bending over all the time. So if you're tall, you need to raise your work surface. And if you're short like me, you need to make it appropriate for your height. You're on your feet, I'd say 95% of the time. This is really actually the only time that I recommend that you sit. The only time I recommend that you sit is when you're foiling or designing or cutting out your project. We'll get into pattern cutting in another video. Now it's important to note which side is the side that you're going to have facing you. I want all the smooth side facing me, so I'm going to make sure that all the textured sides are down. And again, I'm checking the grain, make sure it's going the way I prefer. Oops, there's one that's texture's turned up. It's hard to tell sometimes. So the next step is to solder our project. In order to solder, we need flux and solder. I like to use a paste, although they do make a liquid flux. And I like to use 60-40 solder. I don't prefer the lead-free. I think it's difficult to work with. When we solder our project, we want the solder seams to be rounded. It's rather going to look like if we just laid the solder on there. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to be smooth and rounded, and it's not going to be lumpy. It's not going to have flat places and round places. We want a consistent solder seam. So I want to make sure that my pieces are all in place, and I'm going to tack those at the intersections using my hot soldering iron. Mine looks a little corroded. We want that to be shiny, so I'm using a moist sponge, and I just rake that across once on each side. Using my soldering iron, I'm just going to get a dab of solder and put it at the intersections, just to keep it from moving around as I solder. I don't want a piece to move out of the way or move any while I'm soldering. So I can move this out of the way now. Always use your soldering iron with a stand. Now that I have that tacked in place, I'm just going to put flux wherever there's copper showing. I'm going to start on the edge of my glass and draw inward. I recommend that students do that. And I don't want you to dig at it. You're not painting this on, and digging at it like this is not productive. What you want to do is just make sure you have enough on there. You're kind of feeding your iron. So you notice there's a kind of a glob there. So I can melt that and just drag it along. I'm just barely touching the surface of this glass. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I have enough solder on there. So if you're having trouble soldering, you can add a little, then drag it about an inch, add some more, and drag it about an inch. But you're not going to drag and dig. It's not, you're not painting this stuff on. You're just using a consistent motion and kind of basically hovering just at the surface of that solder. When you get to the end, don't drag it off, because you're just going to make a little puddle. See how that dripped off there? You don't want to do that. So you're going to, as you approach the end, just go to the side at an L-shaped pattern and lift. If you lay your iron down like this and drag it, it's going to make a flat solder seam. Hold your solder up like this and hold it like a wand. You don't want to hold it like a pencil like this because your hand gets in between. Hold it like a wand with your hand on top at an angle so that any solder will run down to the tip. You're going to turn it to the side so that flat place, and it is touching your solder, so you're kind of feeding your solder to the iron and moving your iron along at a steady pace. You don't want to go too fast. You don't want to go too slow. Just make sure you get enough on there. And if you get too much on it, like that, you can go back and smooth it out. So remember, don't run off the edge, move to the side. Now, if you get too much solder on it, you can remelt it. Maybe move it to another seam. Sometimes new students will leave their solder on the seam and lift their iron and notice that it immediately gets stuck. Don't pull on that because it'll tear the tape. Just reheat it and move your solder, not your gun, not your soldering iron. So we're going to start at another seam. When we come to an intersection that's already been soldered, we're going to hesitate for a couple beats. Pause, pause, the intersection. When you get to the edge, make an L shape and lift. Notice all that copper around the edges. You're not going to apply solder here like you did in the seam. You're just going to tin it. We call that tinning, just putting a thin layer. So just drag your iron along it. This does get hot. My seams seem a little lumpy, so I'm going to go over those, pause at the intersection. I'm not going to rush over those. If your solder isn't melting under your soldering iron, it's because you're moving too fast. Slow and steady. Pause, pause. Pause, pause. And L shape. Turn your project. Slow and steady. I'm barely touching it. Pause, pause. Pause, pause. And go to the side. Pause. Pause. There's a little bit too much here. I'm going to take it off. And go to the side. Okay, now notice a little copper there. Now this is kind of hot, so you might want to use your gloves. If you don't work on it too long, it won't get too hot. Then we turn it over. We do the same to the other side. So I'm going to add some more flux, because flux won't stick. Solder won't stick unless your project has flux on it. So I'm going to use these little pieces that I dropped, and that's very handy when we're tinning. So I can go ahead and tin. So first I just make sure there's enough solder on the seam. And the textured side may feel a little weird soldering because it feels bumpy. Oops, when it gets weird like that, you don't have enough flux. You may need to clean your iron a bit. Sometimes you have to kind of wiggle it back and forth to get over those textures. Okay, looks pretty good. Now the only thing we have left to do is the edges. For that, we'll need to put on our glove. There's different ways we could trim this. I could put a piece of hobby lead on it, but I prefer just to finish it the way I'm going to show you. So I have to put flux all the way around. Now, water, it's like water, if there's a drop of water on there and it's tilted, it's going to run off. And that's molten solder is liquefied. So if you hold your project at an angle, it's going to roll off. You want to hold this so that it's just almost standing on its edge. You want it perfectly level. And then we're going to first tin it. Make sure it's fluxed well. Then we're going to take a dab of solder and drop it on there. Then I'm going to move over just a little bit and leave a space and put another drop of solder. Then I'll come in and fill in between. And that gives this solder enough time to solidify so that it doesn't run off as bad. And it will build height. So basically we're making our own cane using our solder. And you can just smooth that out. And you do that all the way around. Now, you want to let that set just a little bit until you see the luster change. And that will tell you that it's ready to move. So I do that all the way around. Now I'll show you what you can do to make your own jump hoops to hang your project. Now you can use chain on this, you can use string. I like to use a strong fishing line so it looks like it's just kind of floating in your window. You never want to hang your project using a suction cup though. You always want to use a screw-in hook. Or a nail or something, but never hang it using a suction cup. Those things always fail because your project is kind of heavy. And if it comes crashing down, it's going to break. Okay, we're almost finished. Okay, so you never want to hang your project. You never want to put your jump hoops on the tape, on the outside edge. You always want to attach it at a seam. And I like to put my textured side down so that the flat is facing me when I hang it in the window. So I'm going to turn it so that the textured side is up right now. And I'm going to use this like a 14 pound, it's an 18 gauge. This is an 18 gauge wire, which is sufficient. So I want to get something that's the diameter, a small diameter, and twist the wire around it a couple times. Then I'm going to use my little nips. And make two little hoops. Now I like to make a little pigtail on mine. I like a small diameter so it doesn't show. And since I'm using a black patina, I'm going to flux and solder. Don't want to get flux on my hands. And I want to hang mine at a diagonal. I'm going to kind of hide my hoop so there's just enough sticking out that I can get my string on there. I want to make sure that's melted in real well so it doesn't let go unexpectedly. There we go. We're finished. I hope you learned something today and I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to challenge you now to make your own stained glass quilt square. Now, in order to clean this, I usually use like a bartender's friend and a degreaser like a Dawn dishwashing liquid. And I'm just removing the flux and any paint, or I'm sorry, a permanent marker that's been left behind. Really get that flux away from the solder seam because it'll kind of etch your glass after a while. You don't want to use anything with ammonia in it or any reactive ingredients like vinegar or something like that to clean your project with. You need to clean it on both sides really well. And when I'm using an abrasive, I don't use anything with the bleach in it. I use an old toothbrush. And don't get underneath that tape. Always work inward where your tape is. And give that a good rinse. Now we're ready for the patina. When you're using patina, make sure that you wear your gloves because it clearly states that it's poison and it will cause burns on the skin. And wear a pair of goggles in case that gets in your eye. It couldn't be good for your eye. It'll burn. If it burns your skin, it's going to burn your eyes out of your head. So, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I just use a paper towel or a toothbrush or even a Q-tip, and you apply the patina to all the solder seam. You can see how that turns it immediately. And I think the black is very attractive on this piece. It really goes better with the colors. And if you get your tape on there well centered, you're not gonna see the backing, but it does show through, especially the more translucent it is, especially if it was clear window glass. It's very noticeable. So you want to give this a good rinsing now. And you can put a glass wax on this and buff it to a shine. Like I said, I get a strong piece of fishing line. You want to knot that very securely. Give it a double knot. There. There you have it. Enjoy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching. God bless you and have a great day.